The first thing I felt was the oppressive weight of Egyptian cotton. My eyes flew open, scanning the familiar, tastefully beige ceiling of the master bedroom. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was a frantic, dying bird trapped behind my ribs, echoing the final, shallow beats from another life. The memory descended not as a thought, but as a full-body trauma, the chemical smell of the hospital, the hollow beep of the monitor, and the crushing, lonely silence of an end that nobody witnessed because he was at her emergency art show. A vase of wilting tulips had been my only company. I was supposed to be dead. Instead, I was 28 again. 2 years before the end. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, but I swallowed it, letting it solidify into a cold, hard stone in my gut. The grief and fear didn't paralyze me this time. They crystallized, sharp and clear, into a single, focused directive: never again. The door clicked open, and Mark strode in, already halfway into his day. He was buttoning his cufflinks, his brow furrowed in that way he thought made him look commandingly busy. Morning. Don't forget the accountant is coming at 3. Have the files ready. In my past life, I would have scurried, my own plans for my birthday dinner dissolving under the weight of his schedule. Now, I just watched him. I saw the performative tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze skimmed over me as if I were another piece of furniture, useful, but unremarkable. The love I'd once felt had been a slow-acting poison. Now, I was immune. It's my birthday, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, still raspy with the ghost of a death rattle. He paused, then offered a distracted smile. I know. 7 p.m., that new fusion place. I've got it blocked out. He said it like he was bestowing a royal favor. Then his phone, his true soulmate, buzzed on the dresser. He pounced on it. His expression shifted, a false concern that he probably thought looked admirably burdened. It's Chloe. Of course it was. The universe was offering me my first test on a silver platter. I sat up slowly, wrapping the sheet around me. Is everything all right? I asked, layering my voice with just the right amount of wifely concern. He sighed, the long-suffering symphony conductor. Her cat sitter cancelled last minute. Mr. Whiskers has some anxiety medication he needs with his morning meal. You know how fragile she is after everything. The poor thing can't handle this kind of stress. The poor thing. He meant the cat. Maybe. Probably both. Old Ashley would have clenched her fists under the sheets, would have said, "But it's my birthday," in a small, crumbling voice that only ever sparked irritation in him. New Ashley saw the script, and decided to rewrite it mid-scene. I let my shoulders drop. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him, making sure the morning light caught the sheen that was suddenly in my eyes. I didn't force a tear, I just thought of that hospital room, and one, perfect, solitary drop obeyed, tracing a slow path down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Of course, I whispered, letting my voice break just so on the second word. Her needs always come first. I took a shaky breath, looking away as if overwhelmed by my own generosity. I hope one day, someone cares for me like that. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in 2 lifetimes. He just stared. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He was prepared for an argument, for a passive-aggressive sigh, for a martyr's acceptance. He was not prepared for this graceful, wounded gift I was handing him. It disarmed his defensiveness and pricked his ego in a completely novel, unsettling way. "Don't be dramatic, Ashley," he finally said, but his tone lacked its usual dismissive certainty. "It's just a cat." I met his eyes then, letting him see the shimmering, unaccusing hurt. "You're right," I said, my trembling smile a masterpiece of fragile bravery. "It's silly of me. Go. Help her. Really." I infused the last word with a finality that sounded like surrender, but felt like a door slamming shut in my own soul. He lingered for another awkward second, muttered something about making it up to me, and left. I listened to the sounds of his hurried departure, the jingle of keys, the definitive thud of the front door. The moment the lock clicked, the performance ended. The tension drained from my body. I walked to the bathroom, regarded my clear-eyed reflection in the mirror, and gave myself a slow, cold smile. The tear had dried. Step 1, confuse the enemy. Step 2, dismantle his world. I didn't spend the day crying. I spent it building. From the back of my wardrobe, I retrieved the James novel, a hollowed-out classic where I'd been stashing cash for years, a nervous habit from a time I didn't understand was preparation. I called a lawyer, one known for being a barracuda in silk, and booked a consultation under a false name, paying a retainer from my secret fund. Then, I sat at my pristine, unused drafting table, a wedding gift for a hobby I'd let Mark mock into dormancy, and I began to draw. Not the insipid florals I used to dabble with, but sharp, clever patterns for textiles. I created an anonymous online portfolio and connected it to a freelance site. The first sale, for a geometric fern print, came through before Mark even texted to say he'd be late. His text arrived at 6. Chloe's still a mess. Taking her for dinner to calm her down. We'll do your birthday tomorrow. Promise. I didn't reply. Let him marinate in the silence. Let him wonder what the quiet meant. Instead, I made myself a luxurious solo dinner. I opened the best bottle of wine in the cellar. And then, I started my new ledger. On a fresh spreadsheet, I typed the title, Asshole Tax. Column A, Infraction. Column B, Monetary Value. I entered the first line, birthday abandonment and emotional labor for his not-girlfriend, $500. It was arbitrary and glorious. This would be the fund for my future. Later, in the dark, silent living room, I stood at the microwave. I put in a single kernel of popcorn. I watched it through the glass door as the heat worked its magic. It spun, alone, then, pop, it blossomed into a perfect, fluffy white shape. I took the solitary piece out, placed it on my tongue, and savored the ridiculous symbolism. This was my life now. Not a violent explosion, but a series of deliberate, quiet pops. I was no longer the endless, unappreciated bag of kernels. I was the heat source. And I was just getting warm. The stage was set. The players, Mark, the oblivious lead, Chloe, the fragile villainess, and me, the former stagehand now holding the script, were in position. Let the divine comedy begin. The asshole tax ledger flourished. Passive-aggressive comment about my cooking, $50. Using my vintage scarf as a grease rag for Chloe's bike chain, $200, plus dry cleaning. Each entry was a tiny suture closing the wound of my old self. The money itself was secondary, the act of valuation was my therapy. My anonymous design account, Verdant Thread, began to gain traction. I received a commission for a series of botanical patterns from a boutique home decor brand. The payment was more than just currency, it was a vote of confidence in a version of me that existed independently of Mark's world. I rented a small, sun-drenched studio downtown under the business name, telling Mark it was a shared creative space for a new book club. He barely glanced up from his financial reports. My irrelevance to his central narrative was my greatest weapon. My strategy with Mark and Chloe evolved from benign neglect to active cultivation. I became their relationship's most enthusiastic gardener. One evening, Mark was venting about a board member who was skeptical of a new acquisition. Chloe, draped over the chaise lounge like a languid fern, offered vague, sympathetic noises. I set down my sketchbook, a thoughtful expression on my face. You know, I said, my tone soft and devoid of any sharp edges, Chloe has a point about intuitive connections. They both looked at me, startled I'd spoken. That board member, Mr. Henderson, he collects abstract sculpture. Chloe, your last piece had that same bold, uncompromising energy. Maybe you should explain your artistic process to Mark. It might give him a new language to connect with him. Chloe's eyes lit up with possessed vanity. Mark looked puzzled, but intrigued. I had just reframed her airheadness as profound intuition and given him a reason to need her. It was corny, it was absurd, and it worked perfectly. The pivotal test came with the Zenith Foundation Gala. It was the social event of the season, a minefield of optics and opportunity. In my past life, I'd spent weeks agonizing over a gown, only to be left standing alone for hours while Mark networked, with Chloe permanently affixed to his side. This time, I saw it not as a battleground, but as a stage I could carefully dress. The night arrived. My dress was a sleek, dark column that felt like armor. Chloe, predictably, wafted in a cloud of chiffon, a fragile orchid next to my obsidian pillar. She'd had a crisis of confidence and begged Mark to escort her. He'd agreed, of course, telling me it was the supportive thing to do. We made it through the cocktail hour. I circulated, exchanging pleasantries with wives I now saw as fellow prisoners in gilded cages. I watched Mark and Chloe. She clung, laughed too brightly at his jokes, and consistently turned her body to exclude me from their circle. It was amateurish. I waited for the precise moment when Mark glanced my way, a flicker of something like guilt on his face. I brought a hand to my temple, allowing a slight tremor to enter my fingers. I let my smile become strained, then deliberately let it fall. I walked over to them, my steps losing their earlier certainty. "Mark?" I said, my voice a carefully calibrated thread of pain. "I'm so sorry. One of my migraines is coming on." The lights, I swayed, just a little. He reached out automatically, his businessman's mind assessing the social damage of a wife collapsing. "We should go." "No," I said, gripping his forearm, letting my eyes plead. "You can't. The Henderson deal is here. This night is crucial." I turned my gaze to Chloe, who was watching me with suspicious, narrow eyes. I offered her my most beatific, suffering smile. "Chloe, you look absolutely radiant tonight. Would you stay with him? Be his support? For the company's image." I paused, letting the unspoken hang in the air. "I am entrusting you with my most valuable possession." I looked back at Mark, squeezing his arm. "I trust you." The three of us stood there in a bizarre tableau. I saw the calculations flit behind Mark's eyes, the logic of staying, the relief of not having to deal with my illness, the ego boost of having two women arranging themselves around his needs. Chloe preened, sensing victory. "You're so understanding, Ashley," Mark said, the patronizing gratitude thick in his voice. "Just get home safe," Chloe added, her sympathy as thin as her chiffon. She already had her hand back on Mark's arm, claiming her prize. I left alone in the town car, the ghost of a smile on my lips. In the rearview mirror, I saw them turn back to the glittering crowd, a united front. The trap had been baited. The photographs were in the society section 2 days later. CEO Mark Sterling and companion Chloe Renard, a vision in blue, deep in conversation at the Zenith Gala. The caption was a masterpiece of implication. The picture was worse. They were leaning close, her hand on his lapel, his head tilted toward her in a way that screamed intimacy. I had the paper waiting on the breakfast table. I was already there, sipping coffee, dressed in paint-splattered jeans from a morning in my studio. I heard his aggressive footsteps on the marble before I saw him. He stormed in, the paper crumpled in his fist. "Ashley, this is a complete misrepresentation," he exploded, slapping the pages down. "The angle, the caption, it's gutter journalism. She was just whispering about Henderson." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I let the silence stretch, watching his anger curdle into confusion at my calm. I finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a gaze so clear and steady it felt like holding ice. "The photos are lovely," I said, my voice utterly flat. "You look like a true power couple. Complementary colors, cohesive body language. The board must be impressed. It projects stability. A united front." He blinked. "What? No, you're not listening." "I am, Mark." I set my cup down with a soft, definitive click. "I've been listening for 10 years. I see it now with perfect clarity." I rose, walking to the window, my back to him. It was a power move I'd learned from him. All that time, I was trying to fit myself into a space that was always, inherently, meant for her. I was trying to be the practical wife when what you needed was the ethereal muse. I turned back, my expression one of serene, devastating finality. "It's okay. I release you from the pretense. I relinquish the space." The color drained from his face. This wasn't the script. His doormat wasn't just getting up, she was calmly holding the door open for him to leave, and suggesting the weather outside was better for him. His ego couldn't compute it. Terror, raw, narcissistic terror, flashed in his eyes. The thought of me, letting him go, was more frightening than any scene I could have made. "Ashley, don't be absurd," he stammered, his anger deflating into panic. "There is no space. There's us. You and me." But the seed was planted. And as predicted, his reaction was not to run to Chloe, but to desperately try to re-ensnare me. He began a campaign of grandiose, empty gestures, massive, inconvenient bouquets sent to the house, last-minute reservations at impossible restaurants where we'd sit in tense silence. Each one was a new line in the asshole tax ledger. Gilt roses, $150. His sudden, intense focus on us meant he began, for the first time, to neglect Chloe. And Chloe, the delicate orchid, began to wilt dramatically. Her crises escalated into farce. A psychic told her she had negative energy attachments from our house, she developed a sudden allergy to the brand of mineral water Mark kept in his office. She claimed a paparazzo was camping outside her loft. It was a food delivery guy. Mark, stressed by his failing campaign to reconquer my affection, started to find her needs not charming, but exasperating. I poured oil on this tiny, beautiful fire. One night, after he'd slammed the phone down following a call about Chloe's stalking a delivery guy, I approached him. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He flinched. "She's in love with you, Mark," I said, my voice a hushed, sorrowful confession. "Truly, deeply. And you've been stringing her along for years, letting her believe she was your priority without ever giving her the commitment. It's cruel." I shook my head, the picture of disappointed compassion. "You need to either let her go completely, or be the man she truly needs. Fully. She deserves that clarity." I was gently, kindly, shoving him off a cliff into her waiting arms. The final piece clicked into place a week later. The business downturn I'd been waiting for showed its first tremor in the market. Mark's pet acquisition, the one Chloe had blessed with her intuitive approval, was particularly vulnerable. I saw the fear in his eyes when he read the reports, a real fear, not the performative kind. That afternoon, I took my sketchpad and a bag of supplies to my downtown studio. I was working on a commission for a fabric pattern I called Gilded Thorns. As I lost myself in the lines, a voice spoke from the open doorway. "Verdant thread. It's clever. Suggests growth, but also something tying you down." I turned. It was Alex Crane, Mark's most perceptive rival. He was leaning against the doorframe, holding 2 artisan sodas from the cafe down the hall. He wasn't handsome in Mark's polished way, he had a watchful, clever face that seemed to find the world quietly amusing. "How did you find this place?" I asked, not bothering with false pleasantries. "I own the building," he said with a small shrug, offering one of the bottles. "Saw the name on the lease. Made the connection. I've also seen the gala photos. And I've watched Sterling flail for the past month like a man who's lost his script." His eyes, sharp and green, met mine. "I'm just here to say, from one student of human absurdity to another, bravo." A genuine laugh escaped me, the first one that didn't feel like a tool or a weapon in a long time. I took the soda. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Of course not," he smiled, tapping his bottle against mine. "Would you like some popcorn? I find it's the best snack for a long-term viewing experience." He knew. He saw the whole grotesque, beautiful comedy. And instead of judging, he'd brought a front-row seat. As the sun slanted through the windows, painting my thorns in gold, I realized the game had just expanded. I was no longer just the playwright. I'd found my first intelligent audience member. The second act was about to begin, and the stakes had just gotten infinitely more interesting. The world, in its deliciously ironic way, began to fold exactly as I'd foreseen. Mark's prized acquisition, the one blessed by Chloe's intuitive genius, was the first domino to fall in the sector-wide correction. I watched the ticker symbols on my studio monitor bleed red, each dip a soothing balm on a decade-old bruise. My verdant thread accounts, however, bloomed a healthy, steady green. That asshole tax ledger had grown into a substantial nest egg, a concrete monument to my silent suffering. The tension in his mansion became a physical entity, thick enough to taste. Mark moved through the rooms like a caged bear, his phone permanently glued to his ear, his shouts echoing off the marble. The grandiose gestures toward me had ceased, replaced by a simmering, bewildered resentment. I had become a locked door in his own house, and it was driving him mad. Chloe, sensing her golden goose was choking on bad investments, escalated her tactics from farce to full-blown melodrama. She sent daily, paragraph-long texts I'd glimpse over his shoulder, full of poetic anguish and not-so-subtle reminders of her unwavering belief in him. Her crises were now professionally tragic. A recommended therapist told her she had relationship-induced somatic pain, and she'd taken up therapeutic screaming in a soundproofed room she'd begged Mark to fund. The beautiful, toxic symbiosis I'd nurtured was now a parasitic nightmare. He needed a scapegoat, she needed a financier. They were perfect for each other. Alex became my silent partner in observation. He'd stop by the studio, never unannounced, always with a coffee or a curious antique drafting tool he thought I'd appreciate. We didn't talk much about my personal comedy of errors, but his presence was a quiet acknowledgement that he saw the stage, the actors, and the playwright. It was a comfort I hadn't known I needed, not a savior, but a witness. The final act required a fitting venue. I invited them both to the mansion for a conversation, framing it as a necessary mediation to find a harmonious path forward. The sheer, audacious civility of it was the hook they couldn't resist. Mark arrived first, radiating aggrieved authority. "I hope you have a solution to this emotional chaos, Ashley. It's impacting my focus at a critical time." Before I could answer, Chloe made her entrance. She was a vision of calculated distress in a cream-colored cashmere wrap, her eyes artfully red-rimmed. "Mark," she breathed, ignoring me completely. "Thank you for this. For making a space for my truth." I gestured to the sitting area, taking my own seat in a high-backed armchair, the judge's bench. "Please, sit. I think we all want clarity." What followed was a masterclass in mutual destruction. Chloe launched into a tearful monologue about emotional neglect and broken promises. Mark, his patience shredded by plunging stock prices, interrupted with cold, financial precision, itemizing the cost of her support, the soundproof room, the wellness retreats, the investment tips that had cost him 6 figures. "You've changed," Chloe finally shrieked, the fragile orchid transforming into a strident magpie. "You used to protect me. Now you're just a hollow, angry man who blames me for his own failures." Mark's face purpled. "All I've ever done is coddle your endless need for attention. And for what? Your intuition is worthless. Your support is a financial drain. Ashley was right about everything, it's all just pointless drama." The room fell silent, save for Chloe's ragged breaths. They both turned to look at me, as if suddenly remembering I was there. I didn't speak. I simply reached for the small, decorative bowl on the side table, my personal popcorn bowl, filled not with popcorn today, but with bronze-wrapped artisan chocolates. I took one, unwrapped it slowly, the crinkling foil absurdly loud in the tension. I placed it on my tongue and let the bitter dark chocolate melt, my expression one of detached, academic interest. The doorbell rang. "That will be the delivery," I said mildly, rising. I returned with a small, sleek cardboard box, the logo of a popular DNA ancestry service prominent on the side. Mark stared, bewildered. "What is this?" "A peace offering," I lied smoothly. "I did one of these. It's fascinating, connects you to your history, shows you your roots beyond all the present-day noise." I slid the box toward the center of the coffee table. "I ordered one for each of us. A fresh start begins with knowing where you truly come from." Chloe looked at it like it was a snake. Mark, ever pragmatic in the most inconvenient ways, seized on the distraction. "It's a frivolous waste of money," he grumbled, but his curiosity was piqued. His own family history was a source of pride. "But fine. If it shuts down this hysterical chapter." He tore into his box with aggressive efficiency, extracting the test tube and instructions. After a long, defiant glare at Mark, Chloe, with trembling hands, did the same. They sat there, in my living room, spitting into tubes like a twisted science project, each hoping the results would somehow prove them the victim. I just smiled and ate another chocolate. The universe, I felt, was about to deliver its punchline. Weeks passed. The business news grew grimmer for Sterling Holdings. My divorce papers, delivered by my Barracuda lawyer, were a masterpiece of quiet leverage, citing irreconcilable differences and leveraging Mark's distraction for a swift, favorable settlement. He signed them in a haze of desperation, seeing it as one less battle to fight. The day the DNA results went live in our portals, I invited them back. One last time. They arrived separately, both diminished. Mark's suit was sharp but hung on him slightly, he'd lost weight. Chloe's ethereal beauty was hardened by strain. The enmity between them crackled in the air. "Let's get this over with," Mark snapped, logging into his tablet. Chloe, her face pale, did the same on her phone. I didn't bother to log in. I just watched their faces. For a moment, there was only the quiet tap of fingers on screens, the hum of the refrigerator. Then Mark's brow furrowed. He blinked, leaning closer. This has to be an error." Chloe made a small, choked sound. Her phone clattered to the Persian rug. "What does yours say, Chloe?" I asked softly, my voice the only calm thing in the room. She couldn't speak. Her hands were pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was rapidly eclipsing every other drama she'd ever concocted. Mark looked from his screen to her, his arrogance dissolving into dawning, sickening comprehension. It says, shared DNA. 25%. That's. A half-sibling, I finished for him, the words clean and clear in the heavy air. I let the truth hang, let it contaminate every whispered confidence, every touch, every special bond they'd weaponized against me. The ultimate corny twist, so absurd it circled back to tragic. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of two narratives shattering at once. Mark slowly sank into a chair, the tablet slipping from his hands. He looked at Chloe not with love or longing, but with a kind of biological revulsion. Chloe simply stared into the middle distance, her entire identity, the wounded muse, the special friend, crumbling to ash. I stood up. I felt no triumph, only a profound, echoing emptiness that was somehow peaceful. The comedy was over. Well, I said, my tone light, almost conversational. That certainly puts a new spin on your deep, unbreakable connection, doesn't it? It seems your father had a lasting legacy beyond the boardroom. I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood. I paused, not looking back. The divorce is final. My things are gone. The house is yours to sell. I'd suggest you two figure it out. I closed the door gently on the ruins of my past life. There was no screaming, no final confrontation. Just the soft, definitive click of a story ending. Months later, the launch party for Verdant Thread's first major collection was in full swing. My studio space was alive with light, laughter, and the tangible proof of my own hands. The patterns on the walls, gilded thorns, resilient roots, dawns unfolding, were my story, translated into color and form. Alex found me by the refreshment table, which featured, in a final wink, a large crystal bowl of perfect, fluffy popcorn. A full house, he noted, handing me a glass of champagne. His eyes held no pity, no rescue, only shared understanding. The reviews are in. A stunning debut of bold, self-possessed beauty. Quite the reinvention. I clinked my glass against his. It's not a reinvention. It's a restoration. I just scraped away the paint someone else kept slathering on. He nodded toward the window, beyond which the city lights glittered. And the other players? In the Divine Comedy? I took a savory sip, the bubbles bright and clean on my tongue. Last I heard, he sold the company at a massive loss to pay off the debts her intuition accrued. She moved to a remote coastal town, supposedly to find herself away from the toxic patterns of her past. I couldn't help the small, dry smile. They haven't spoken since that day. It turns out, facing a mirror that shows you your own grotesque reflection is the one crisis you can't blame on anyone else. And you? He asked, his gaze steady on mine. No desire for a bow, a final speech. I looked around at my creation, at the life I'd built from the ashes of their drama. I thought of the lonely hospital bed, the unwitnessed death. This noise, this beauty, this autonomy, was my revenge, my answer, my closure. I didn't need to give a speech, I said finally, turning back to him, my heart curiously light. I just provided the stage. They wrote their own tragedy. My only job was to provide the popcorn and know when the show was over. Alex smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. And what's next for the impresario? I looked at my hand, no longer marked by a wedding band, strong and stained with the evidence of my work. I looked at the man beside me who saw the architect, not the ruin. I took a single kernel of popcorn from the bowl, held it up, and let it catch the light. Next, I said, popping it into my mouth with a contented crunch, I believe I'm finally free to enjoy the main feature.